end-to-end automation to the invoicing and the digital payments process. Being able to lower that barrier of entry for small and mid-cap size enterprises, giving them an opportunity to digitize what historically has always been a pretty paper-heavy process, whether that's the invoicing portion of that process, or ultimately what we're talking about today with regard towards the digital payments and executing those payments in a more efficient and, I should say, risk-averse manner.
And I guess it's been a pretty busy time lately with all the changes that we're going to be talking about.
Absolutely. With just what's going on in the world and what's gone on in just the last 2 years, we've seen a massive adoption of technology and process improvement within those organizations at all different levels, whether it's the leadership at the top, all the way down to the AP staff that's actually, preparing the checks or preparing those payments and spending a whole majority or a large chunk of their week in doing so.
Okay, so just to get everybody thinking in the right place about where we've come from, where we're going, what's happening, could we explore a little bit about the background and the history of payments and payment methods? So in a way, looking at the things that we're trying to get rid of, right, what we're replacing them with. I don't know who wants to kick off on that because it sounds like a massive topic.
Yeah, Deborah? I'll kick it off. Yeah, I'll kick it off. So I'll talk about, my previous experience with payment processing and really what I still hear from some accounts payable teams today. But historically, right, payment processing or payments to vendors, those were done in-house, meaning that there was a separate group or team members that handled the payment function. And then the payment methods that were available were ACH, wire, and check, right? And so for ACH, we had to set up the pay files, we had to test the pay files with the bank, we had to collect the vendor's banking, right, to include on there. With wires, we had to bring in perhaps another group, because sometimes Treasury handled wires. And so we had to send that information to them along with the vendor's banking, because they had yet another, platform that they had to key those in to send them to the bank. And then finally, we did have checks, right? And we all know the issues with those. They're very manual, they're very costly, and you have to deal with those checks that may not even get to the vendor because they're returned. And then if you don't deal with those, or they don't ultimately get to your vendor, now you have this sheetment process to handle. And so it was done in-house, it was very laborious, and it was costly.
And when did things start to change? I mean, we can talk about the pace of change and the reasons for that in a moment or two, but how long has sort of a gradual change been going on, would you say?
Yeah, I think, and Blake, I'm sure you guys saw this as well, but I think the events of the last 2 years really has companies looking at the way that they are doing things. And accounts payable, unfortunately, was not always a priority. And so, they may have been asking for, updated technology or emerging technology at the time and just didn't get approval for it. But I think that, the events of the past 2 years really has brought attention that accounts payable needed to leadership. And now I think we've had some movement in that area, and we continue to have that upward trend of accounts payable getting away from in-house and moving to a more digitized platform. And Blake, I'm sure that's what you guys have seen as well.
Oh, absolutely. From a digital, from an e-invoicing and specifically digital payment standpoint, COVID completely, 2020 changed everyone's life, right? And it made legacy process highly exposed, and all of the intricacies of that legacy process, which you mentioned, quite a few just right there, right? That, ultimately organizations that were used to being forced to come into the office, right, to execute their individual functions, or to run, that batch pay for the week and so forth, or execute that, I should say, we're no longer able to. It's everyone's at their home, everyone's disparate. Even centralized form of accounting became essentially decentralized, right? Just from a geographic standpoint of people having to be isolated from those teams that you just talked about. And ultimately at the same time, with doing so, we saw fraud potential and/or really increased from about 37. It was about 32% during 2020, I should say, and actually has tapered off about down to 27% here this last year. Again, because after 2020, everyone came together, especially the leaders of these organizations, and said, hey, something's got to change. We've got to go about this in a different way. We're highly exposed, and they needed a way to really automate that process. And in doing so, speaking with CIOs and CFOs, it's it's changing over time.
Just to pin down and think about it, we've had a question from Gary saying, Deborah, what percentage of payments would you say, well, I guess both of you, would you say are still made via check in the US? Because checks were more popular, weren't they, for longer in the US? So what percentage do you think it is now? Could you put a figure on that?
That is a very good question, Blake. I don't know if you have specific percentages. I don't have any. I have seen some surveys on it, though, and they have reduced, but not as much as you think they would have reduced as a result of COVID. The U.S., especially compared to international countries or non-U.S. countries, is still very have just that higher percentage of check payments. And I have talked to accounts payable teams that don't think they'll ever be able to get rid of those checks. But one thing I would say is that I saw, at the beginning of this whole pandemic, that there were lots of accounts payable teams that, because of what Blake was saying, right, they can't get into the office to do those check payments. They were converting a lot of those check payment method vendors to ACH. And what we ultimately saw is that invited more fraud, because those were the same teams that were collecting the vendor's banking information via email to convert those check payment methods, those check payment vendors to ACH payment vendors. And the fraudsters knew that, and they took advantage. And so fraud, we did see increase with ACH. And Blake, I don't know if you guys have any stats on what the check payments were before COVID and what they are now, but I know I've seen them decrease. I just don't have specific stats.
I don't either, on specifically from a check to ACH to virtual card standpoint, but just like you said, right in parity with it. It's hey, let's start steering that check payment away. That strategy becomes check to ACH. And then ultimately those folks that were already in that position of being comfortable with ACH or had already made that migration away from paper check, then began to explore the possibility of turning what once was always a cost center of the business into a new revenue generating portion of the business via that virtual card option that so many payment providers and that we at Use offer today, and provide the opportunity for that revenue share on that spend that may have just been going out prior via ACH or paper check, right?
Okay, I've got another question to put to both of you from somebody who's joined us, but could I just ask very briefly, what are the reasons that people are giving you for thinking they'll never get away from checks completely?
Because they have vendors that will not accept anything outside of a check. But I will say, right, that went down as well. Although I mean, I may agree that you'll always have those vendors that want that paper check, but throughout the pandemic, right, especially at the beginnings, the vendors couldn't get to their offices either, right, to pick up those checks. And so now you have more, a higher volume of vendors or higher percentage of vendors that are open to other payment methods, like a virtual card, which is a payment method I would have much rather seen those check payment vendors converted to at the beginning of COVID, to avoid that fraud that's just inherent in the ACH payment method. But you know, you're just going to have those vendors that are just not going to accept anything but a paper check method. Now, I have seen companies, and some companies are big enough to say, we will not do a check. If you want to do business with us, then you need to pick between these check payment or these payment methods that we have. And that actually really works the best, but I understand not all companies can say that. But hopefully that will go away. Because like I said, when we compare the US to Europe, Europe has, or actually all international companies, they have lower percentages of check payments if they have any.
Because I was going to say, it's a general thing, isn't it? The more people expect to use digital methods themselves, then companies are going to have to go away from it. Let's go to the question from Hardik. What's the best way to reduce transaction fees? I guess you've got a little to say about that, the pair of you.
Absolutely. I'll take that one. So within the use platform itself, the ability to piggyback off of that e-invoicing workflow process directly into your digital payment workflow of approvals, maybe singular, maybe dual. Ultimately, what's happened is we've provided a platform, a centralized place for all of those individuals within that business and or enterprise to come together and work and execute those invoices through payment, but ultimately providing in that payment portion of the platform the ability to batch pay. So what the use platform will do is, as payments are approved, regardless of the complexity from a level of approval standpoint, and they're deemed complete, what we can do is actually schedule payments. So as those invoices sit there in the background of use complete, use is actually intelligent enough on a scheduled basis to batch those invoices. Let's say I've got three transactions or 3 invoices that need to be paid to a singular vendor. Use will actually execute the payment for all 3 of those invoices in one transaction. So ultimately, that's the one thing that I see clients utilize within our platform on a regular basis to significantly drive down that transaction cost. That's just kind of a point of reference from the use side of the house.
Yeah. Do you have anything to add, Deborah?
Yeah, and it's also reduces the amount of personnel, right, that you have to process that invoice to make that payment. And I think one of the other things that really came to light when the pandemic hit was just how disjointed our groups were, either within AP, between posting invoices and making payments, or bringing in the procurement team, right? There could be different, each one of them could have different platforms, right, that you have to use it, and they're not connected. And so you do this, abrupt change to going home, and now you don't have access to everything anymore, and you can't access it easily from home. And there's no one place that you can go to see that full end-to-end process. And and that's just more labor, right? That's more folks that you need for the process. And digitizing it brings it all to one platform. You can access it from anywhere, and it also could help with those labor issues, especially with those companies that are still sending out a lot of checks, right? Because you have to generate those checks. You have to make sure that the printer is up and running. I will tell you that when we were sending checks, we put a picture of Bob Marley on the printer, and people would come in and go, well, why is his picture on the printer? And we go, because he be jamming. So the printer maintenance was a big thing, not to mention the fact we had a couple of instances where we put the checks in upside down, or if we have multiple checking accounts, we put the wrong set of checks in there. And so, the manual piece with that, and also the number of hours that it took, the number of staff, right, that we had to have, and we had to have for coverage, was just one of the, that was just one of the biggest challenges. And I imagine that accounts payable teams today, with the great resignation and really with, just competing with positions that you didn't have to compete with before to get those AP staff, because now, other positions are paying more because, the labor force is just not where it is right now. And so I think anything that you can do to reduce that AP staff, to reduce your manual costs, is a win-win, not just for your company, but then also for your vendor too, because they have some advantages on using or being paid via digital payments versus especially check payment, paper check payments that, some people just cannot get used to or cannot get rid of.
So with what you're saying there, it looks as though the labor problems, finding people to work for you, has kind of overtaken the argument that people are worried about this is going to take our jobs away, because actually they just get to do other things rather than servicing the printer or putting the checks in upside down.
Yeah, and I am all for adding value-added tasks to those folks that may, no longer have to do those manual tasks. There are things out there that they can do to help the AP team provide value to other groups in the company. But I went to a conference last month, and I heard someone say that the local Taco Bell was paying, had increased their wages to the point where they were competing for the same staff. And so you need to take that into consideration as well, and maybe that eliminates digitizing your B2B payments will eliminate that issue with you have with recruiting and retaining staff.
Okay, before we move on, I've got a poll for everybody next. Just a very quick comment about the loss of ability to receive early payment discounts if things are digitized. Is that a big issue, or can it be dealt with?
Yeah. So
Blake?
actually, I was just reading an article this last, I think it was a couple days ago, but it was around some of the key reasons for late payments. And obviously those late payments are the causation ultimately of us and or clients missing those rebates and missing those discount opportunities. And the top three reasons were actually, it said that 39% responded because of slow process, 35% responded with the answer of administrative errors, and 42% responded with validating invoicing. So those being the three top reasons that ultimately late payments were issued by any organization. So again, giving a platform and providing a place in a means modality of giving allowing everyone to come to a singular platform as to execute along those processes. And really, from a timing standpoint, when automation is applied either to the invoicing portion of the process or to the payments, to the digital payment side, we see processing times go from sometimes 7 to 10 days, all the way down to a couple hours, where these people that are normally passing paper desk to desk or checks in a binder desk to desk for multiple signatures and approvals and things like that, those things sit, right? People are busy, we all have lives, we all have jobs, and so ultimately things hit the desk, sometimes they get left on the desk, And then ultimately, that's going to hurt the organization in the long run by missing out on those rebate and discount opportunities.
Okay, let's see what's going on then. Let's have a poll. So the question is, which payment methods are your business currently using to pay vendors? And you can put all the ones in that are being used: check, e-check, ACH, credit card, virtual card, or wire. So give you a couple of moments to go down the list, choose what you think is still being used, not what you think should be being used maybe, but what is being used, and then we'll have a little look at that in a moment or two. So which payment methods are your business currently using to pay vendors? Check, e-check, ACH, credit card, virtual card, or wire? And you can choose as many as you're using. It doesn't have to be your favorite. Give people the chance to have a go at that. And then in a moment, we'll be moving on to why it's essential to move on to digitising vendor payments. So we've got a little bit of everything. So I don't know whether, Deborah, Blake, you think that's what you would expect. So 76% are still using check, e-check 12%, ACH 56%, credit card 56%, virtual card nobody, and wire 48%. Any surprises there, or is that what you'd expect to see?
So for me, no real surprises. I thought that there would be at least some with virtual cards. And while I wanted check, the paper check to be less, I'm not surprised that it's 76%.
After all you've said, we can't change that for the moment. Is that your view, Blake?
Definitely in parity there. Today, paper check is still the primary mode of payment for most, and it's at this point that people are really coming to the table and saying, okay, how do we get away from that, right? And it looks like, based on the poll, ACH and credit card, a lot of folks have moved to an off paper form of issuing payment. E-check is definitely something I feel like we'll see an increase of here over the next year or two. And again, wire obviously handled for all international payments and so forth. We're always going to see that. But Deborah and I were actually speaking a couple days ago about virtual card, and I was speaking to her about how we at Use are seeing virtual card adopted and implemented into that process. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely on par with what's going on today.
Okay. Of course, we did ask if they used, a multitude of things. So right. There might not be too many checks in a company, but I guess as long as there's 2 or 3 people thinking that's what they want to do, they'll still have to press that button. But interesting thing. Okay. So why is digitising vendor payments so essential? I mean, we've touched on a lot of it while you've been talking, but let's talk specifically. Risk mitigation. I don't know if there's any more you want to say about that. You've both said quite a bit about it, but is there anything else you'd like to point up about why it really works?
Yeah, and I'll start, Blake, and I'll start back at what I talked about before with the ACH and so many companies turning to that during the pandemic, and it's continuing today, right, converting those check payment vendors. But the risk you have with that is most of those companies are still receiving the vendor banking information via email, and email is ripe with fraud. According to the FBI, they issue a report every year that reflects what has been reported to them as far as fraud. And with business email compromise and fraudsters pretending to be vendors, pretending to be, your CEO, pretending to be anyone to get you to make those bank changes, those annual losses, or the average loss per incident, increased from 71,000 in 2019 to over 120,000 in 2021. And that means that the fraudsters are not just targeting, those larger companies. So we hear about the millions of dollars lost all the time, but they're not just targeting those large companies. With that average loss of $120,000, it means that they are targeting the smaller companies, the mid-sized companies. And so it really is a huge risk if you are still collecting vendor banking information via email for those ACH payments, and digitizing those payments and having the option of something like a virtual card where the risk is mitigated because the payment is only for that one vendor and it's only for that one amount. And there is also some fraud protections with using any type of a card. I think that's really why it's so essential now. And I will also kind of end that by saying last year, I think it was last year where we saw some infrastructure issues here in the States. I think it was North Carolina, right? Ransomware took down a pipeline, people couldn't get gas. And so lots of attention and dollars have been spent on protecting governments and companies from ransomware. And so the fraudsters are finding that it's not as successful. And so what are they turning to? They're turning to business email compromise more and more because it's an easy way to get to divert vendor payments and get that fraudulent payment sent. Okay. So something needs to be done. And I think digitizing is the answer, especially with virtual cards.
Okay, that picks up. So we've had a question from Eric who says, can you review some of the benefits of virtual cards? I mean, would you say that the main one is security, or can you, are there any others would you put there?
Yeah, absolutely. So from a virtual card standpoint, I see clients, or we have clients looking to utilize virtual card primarily, just like Deborah said, from a security standpoint, because virtual cards differ than credit cards in the sense that that virtual card is generated only one time. That card number, the security around that card is generated once. It's not a credit card that you're putting in a system and or that you're giving to somebody or something like that. It's generated, it's sent to you via email, and it then can, just like every other payment, be integrated into your accounts receivable system and then utilized to pay other bills within the business itself. So I would say the fact that it is a singular digital copy, as opposed to something that can be recreated and or stolen and reused. So I would say that that one-time issuance of it is what really delineates it from the other modalities of the payments that we've talked about here today. And then outside of that, it's the instantaneousness of the fact, from an I should say issuance standpoint, right? Yes, you have the ACH. Yes, you have e-check, paper check and so forth, but all of those have to be, some of them involve float, and some of those, take, especially with the paper check, right, 4 or 5 days or more than that, floating through the mail and going through a million different hands and so forth, which again, just expose folks to that greater risk of fraud.
Okay.
Yeah, and if you compare that faster payment, right, because the newest one out there, right, is the instant payment platforms, and you compare that to the virtual card. The virtual card has that, again, as Blake talked about as well, that additional security. And I just don't think those platforms that allow those instant payments, I think it's just too soon. I don't think they have the security in place that is necessary to scale that for B2B payments. I like the concept of getting paid faster instantaneously, but I think there's a more secure way to do that. And one of those is the virtual card.
Okay, thank you. And before we move on to our next poll, a pretty general question, but I think you can both have a conversation about it and help people. How can we begin implementing a new system for vendors? Very general question, but what would your top things be?
Yeah. So I'll say that the biggest thing that you need to do outside of picking a great third-party provider is to get ready for that. Is to make sure you have email addresses for all your vendors, right? We've all inherited, vendor master files, and we don't know what they collected, but it definitely wasn't the email address. Or maybe you just started requiring the email address. And you've got vendors in there that they're not populated. So you definitely want to collect those missing email addresses. We had an intern. I don't know, it's summertime. Don't know if that's intern, but we made that an intern project. And then once you do that, make sure that that communication comes from you, your third-party provider. May have some verbiage, a template that they can give you, but make sure it comes from your company, because that will drive increased adoption of that platform.
Okay. Blake, implementation.
Yeah. So one thing I would add to that is also sitting down and looking at that vendor list, right? And that's something that we do with clients during our implementation process, and help them strategize and help them think about, okay, what vendors are currently only requiring check? What vendors are currently taking ACH? So essentially mapping your vendor really relationships and preferences out, and then being able to identify, okay, how do we begin to steer these vendors that are so stuck on paper check towards some form of digital, more risk averse payment method, right? Or, hey, here's all of our vendors currently on ACH. What percentage of these and what percentage of that spend can we then try to direct toward VC, and begin to have that conversation with those vendors? And it's all about education. Right? Vendors, people don't know what they don't know. And and innately, we as humans are uncomfortable with change. And so this whole digital payments evolution that we've seen over the last 2 years has also been a massive undertaking by leadership within these organizations to manage and control, excuse me, that change process.
Mm-hmm.
And not just externally with the vendors, but also internally with their own teams too.
Okay.
So I would say, really mapping out what that vendor network or that vendor ecosystem looks like for them, and then begin to get strategic about it.
Okay. Well, I said we go straight onto the poll, but we've got one more question. And while we have you two here, I think people want to hear you answer their questions rather than mine. So can you speak? This is from Sean, who says, can you speak to the advances in two-way integration of AP solution vendors with accounting systems? So he's controller of his company. And one of the drawbacks of adding an AP solution vendor into the workflow as an integrated third-party partner software platform is the dependency on proper two-way integration. Paramount to have effective fiscal controls, for instance, handling voided bills, payment tracking, etc. And he says, thank you in advance. So I don't know who wants to take off that from O.
I'll take it.
Okay.
Go ahead, Blake.
No, you're good. Go ahead, Deborah. I'm fine.
Well, just really quick, I will say, and I understand that AP is not always on the top of the capital project list. And sometimes when you have an implementation project and you have to integrate to that third-party platform, IT is required. We had that issue, and I will tell you, we solved it by using bots of all things, right? So in cases where you're integrating, it's either API or it's a batch, but we were able to, or batch API integration or batch integration, and we were able to step in for IT where they could not or just didn't have the time to do that on our behalf, and we use bots to swivel chair that information from our third-party provider to our accounting system or ERPs. And I know that is like out of the box, but at that point we needed to find a way to get it done, and we did.
Okay, Blake.
So just like Deborah said, that two-way integration between both, in this case, use and whatever accounting system or ERP that client's using it is paramount, absolutely. And that data share bidirectionally between those systems is critical too, especially for end-to-end process from an automation standpoint, invoicing all the way out through payments, whether that's order data being shared over into the use platform for us to make an automatic two-way or three-way match, or us pushing that data out as soon as it's completed, meaning the pay approvals occurred and so forth, and sharing that data out. Now, whether it's like Deborah said, an API where that information is shared instantaneously and in time, or depending on a client's accounting system and or ERP, it may be a bit more legacy, and there may not be an API call built already with that particular ERP. But there are many different ways at which file exchange can still occur, and that data between those systems shared, whether it's RPA and the utilization of bots to transfer that data on a scheduled basis so that it is still at least partially automated, and it's not something that has to be manually generated and then manually dropped onto an SFTP server or something like that. But there are a multitude of different ways, even outside of API integration, that we work with clients to seamlessly, or as seamlessly as possible, still automate that data share between.
Okay. Thanks. A quick poll, and then we'll finish with mopping up some things that we haven't talked about. So when are you looking to adopt digital payments? Just one choice. We're doing it now, within the next month, 1 to 3 months, 4 to 6 months, 7 to 9 months, 10 to 12 months, lots of choices here, 1 to 2 years time, 3 to 4 years time, more than 5 years time, or we haven't even considered digital payments yet. So when are you looking to adopt digital payments in your company, as far as you know? You're doing it next month, within the next month, 1 to 3, 4 to 6, 7 to 9, 10 to 12, 1 to 2 years, 3 to 4 years, more than 5 years, or you haven't even considered it. And we'll have a look and see what that is in a moment. And before we've got a few more minutes, just to Deborah and Blake to be thinking about new and emerging payment options that might be available that we haven't even thought about yet. I think we've touched a little bit on what's going on, but the latest payment tech and benefits for business, and we'll see. I think we're getting the results up here now, so let's have a look. So, everybody's on board within 2 years, and 14% are doing it now. So, and actually 24%, which is quite a big number, isn't it? And maybe that's why they're listening to you today, thinking 1 to 3 months will be when they're getting on board with it. And so 34% altogether with the 4 to 6 months. So a lot of people moving on that. So that's, I guess, what you'd expect. Great. Okay, so the emerging payment options, a couple of minutes each. So what would your top picks be for this subject? Blake.
Again, from an emerging payment standpoint, we've talked around virtual card, and I feel like that's something that it's in place now. It's ready to go. It's a technology that is secure. It is built out. More and more providers today are picking up on that, and at least pushing forward, having the conversation with businesses. But I think far and beyond that, I definitely see digital payments becoming more and more hands off, right? I mean, more so than they even are today. Even more automated in the intelligence with regard toward batching, like we talked about a few minutes ago, and really having some strong machine learning behind that payment issuance as to drive down whatever cost we possibly can and drive up ultimately the efficiency of getting those payments to our clients or to our suppliers and vendors, and them depositing that into their bank, because at that point, that full process is over, and there's another 500 transactions to go the next day. But I definitely feel like VC is where things are going, and at least the conversations I'm having with CAOs and CFOs and controllers right now, it's the early adopters, I should say, right? And because we're definitely still in an early adopter phase of this, and we'll see, just like that poll showed us, that there's going to be people that are interested in coming out of the woods and wanting to have these conversations strategically and understanding what options and so forth there are within the market.
Deborah, what would you add to that before we go?
Yeah, and so again, I would agree with virtual cards, but I think there is a solution to those companies and those vendors that want that paper check, right? There's the e-check option that's out there within the digital B2B payment space, and that can then combine with the banking technology out there for mobile check payments. So just imagine your vendor getting that e-check, and now they can just take a picture of it, using their financial institution's program, even on their phone, so they can do it on the go. It's convenient, and make that deposit. Maybe that's the differentiator, right? To get these vendors to move to at least to e-check payments and offer paper checks.
Yeah.
One thing I did remember about why someone asked a question about why there's still so many, what the reasons are for paper checks. And I did remember one thing: lots of companies have paper check as a default payment method, especially if an electronic payment method comes back unsuccessful. And so that keeps the paper checks out there.
Okay, thanks very much. Talking about paper checks, one thing we've not even really touched on are some of the sustainability issues. People being able to work at home and not travel, not using all that paper, not using all that stuff. Anyway, I'm sure we'll get there at another webinar. So for today, thanks to Deborah Richardson and Blake Bridges from Muse. And thanks to you all for joining us and for your questions. For more information on membership and courses, please head to the IFOL website. Also, you'll find there details of our event schedule, including our first in-person conference since lockdown in the UK in London on November the 4th, but you can register for that, or you can look ahead to spring 23 when there'll be conferences in Tampa, Florida in the US, and in Ontario, Canada, and you can register for any updates on those. This webinar is available on demand on the IFOL website from tomorrow. Please feel free to share, and we'll send a link to top suggestions and a PDF best practice guide. So thanks again for joining us.
Thank you, Sue.
Thank you.